Mr. Gary Krupp is a unique man. He is the highest decorated Jewish person in the Vatican. He's received 3 knighthoods from 3 separate popes, the highest award that the Pope can give the papal household, and has led groups honoring rescuers. And he is building bridges between the Jewish and the Catholic and the Muslim world with his Pave the Way Foundation, a marvelous and important project to honor Catholic rescuers. 75% of the people who were rescuing Jews just happened to be Catholic. And there was about 24,000 Catholic rescuers rescuing Jews. And that represents over 3 million Jews who are alive today or descendants, which constitutes at least 20% of all Jews living today. And it's Gary Krupp who honors the Vatican and the Catholic rescuers who did that. Mr. Gary Krupp.
I want to begin by thanking Eric and the association and Madam Speaker and Congressman Chu for this event and for inviting Pave the Way Foundation to be part of this. We are an international organization that works with problems and obstacles between religions. We don't deal with religion, and we identify these in every one of the Abrahamic faiths. And this is extremely important. I'm going to quote Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who said that silence in the face of evil is itself evil. He said, God will not hold you guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. These people, all here in the United States, did something to change the life. And as it says in the Quran and in the Holy Scriptures, the Jewish Scriptures, you save life. One save life is you save all of humanity. The important thing, the message that we have, Pave the Way, we're in 19 countries. One of our directors, Bennett's here, my wife, is our co-founder. And what we do is that what happened with Angelo Roncalli happened all over the world under the instructions of Pope Pius XII. And we have used our position in Rome to unearth over 76,000 pages of documents proving everything we say, available free of charge on our website to download, where you will see the actual actions they did, saving close to 850,000 Jewish lives. The Catholic Church, under the pontificate of Pius XII, which is today representing 27% of all the Jews alive in the world today. There are only 16 million Jews in the world. And so this is an extremely important effort, and this was the reputation of this saintly man was destroyed by a Russian disinformation project called Seat 12. The KGB did this in 1964, and we're now going to use, we're doing a film, we're going to be doing a film and documentary to at least prove everything we say. But I am very, very grateful for inviting us, and we're partnering now with Eric. We're going to be doing this further and hopefully making some major difference. But we've been doing it since 2006, and as I said, 76,000 pages of documents and interviews that we've taken from people who actually were there, 100-year-old guys. They're all gone now, but we took interviews. It's now memorialized on our website where you can see the actual life-saving efforts that occurred in Europe and completely ignored by the world and unfortunately a media that only likes to push one side and not the other. And this is something that we're working to end, but I appreciate it very much. Thanks for everybody's patience. Eric.
When Mr. Kurzman revealed all of this to me, I was astonished. I believed, as many fellow Jews in my generation did, that in order to oppose communism, that the Holy See was complicit with the Nazis. I further believed that the Church was only concerned with Vatican assets and was indifferent to the fate of the European Jews. I thought the Holy See refused to excommunicate Nazis. Surprisingly, the Vatican documents show that in 1930, the German bishops excommunicated anyone who joined the Nazi Party, wore the uniform, or flew the flag. These revelations compelled Meredith and me to rethink our personal beliefs and subsequently started us and Pave the Way Foundation on this long journey, which continues to this very day. Before interceding on behalf of Mr. Kurzman, we felt it necessary to perform due diligence. We began online research into the archives of major newspapers, including the Jerusalem Post, the New York Times, and many others. I queried from 1939 to 1958 the subject of Pope Pius XII and the Jews. To my surprise, I could not find one negative article. On the contrary, most of the press was positive towards the wartime actions of Pope Pius XII and the Vatican. I further discovered that the most prominent Jewish personalities of the era praised the actions of the Church, and specifically Pope Pius XII. Golda Meir, Albert Einstein, all of the Jewish organizations, the chief rabbis of Rome, of Egypt, of Palestine, of Romania, of Denmark, and many more showered the Catholic Church with unreserved praise. Most convincing to me were the words of a noted Hungarian Jewish scholar, Jenő Levi, who lived through the war. Levi said of Pius XII, "It's a particularly regrettable irony that the one man in all occupied Europe who did more than anyone else to halt the dreadful crime and alleviate its consequences is today made the scapegoat for the failures of all of the others." How is this possible that all those who lived through the war and actually experienced Nazi barbarism had diametrically opposite opinion of Pope's life-saving actions from those who were born after the war? Soon thereafter, Meredith and I traveled to Jerusalem, where we met with the chief Ashkenazi rabbi of Israel, to whom we revealed our findings. Rabbi Yonah Metzger encouraged me to use my position with the Vatican to investigate everything possible on this subject. He said the Holy Scriptures teach us that ingratitude is one of the worst character flaws a Jew can have. If my suspicions were true, I thought at the time, then generations of Jews who would have been denied the dignity of showing gratitude to their rescuers in the Catholic Church and the Vatican. I soon came to realize that the false narrative I believed to be accurate was the result of Soviet disinformation, a Soviet disinformation plan initially hatched in February of 1960, 2 years after the death of Pius XII. Operation Seat 12. The plan was advanced in 1963 by theatrical media and propaganda, followed by a slew of poorly researched books. I then presented this information to Pave the Way Foundation's Board of Directors for action. Our board knew we would be opening a Pandora's box. But we felt that shining the bright light of truth on years of dark disinformation was worth any potential problems. We promised to reveal all the information we discovered, whether positive or negative. My wife Meredith and I traveled extensively to gather primary documentation. We interviewed eyewitnesses on video who had first-hand information of what and went on the record. These revealing videos would prove very, very important, since many of those we have interviewed have since passed away. But their indispensable testimony has been preserved. We partnered with many international scholars, some of whom are with us today. We collected and posted online for public study thousands of wartime documents, many of which were discovered in the archives of individual dioceses throughout Europe. Pave the Way Foundation brought together many scholars and invited many of the critics to the Vatican and the papacy of Pius XII to multiple international symposia, the goal of which was to study the evidentiary materials of the era. In 2006, when Pope Benedict ordered the opening of the Vatican archives up to 1939, we expected that all of the critics of the Catholic Church's supposed role in the Holocaust would come to the newly opened archives to research their theories and allegations. Shockingly, few ever did. Nevertheless, our team of scholars did their research for them. To date, we have posted on our website 76,000 pages of primary sourced documentation along with eyewitness videos on our website. The research all available free of charge for scholarly study. For this effort, we thought we would be applauded by all of those historians who had been clamoring for wartime documents. Instead, we were excoriated by those whose books and theories were totally discredited by the evidence we had unearthed. In 36 days, Pope Francis will open 6, or actually all, of the Vatican archives, 8 years earlier than canon law decrees. We fully expect much will be revealed, and our efforts over the last 14 years will be confirmed and advanced. Through the presentation and documents you will see today, we intend to respond to the following important questions.
Well, as early as 1917, Pacelli had already intervened to save virtually 10,000 of Jews from a probable genocide. In 1930, Pope Pius XI made Pacelli his new Secretary of State, the number 2 position in the Vatican. When on April 1, 1933, the Nazis attacked Jewish shops in Germany, Pacelli brought this to the attention of the Pope, Pius XI. Pacelli asked the new nuncio in Berlin, Cesare Orsenigo, and the head of the German Bishops' Conference, Cardinal Michael von Faulhaber, whether a diplomatic intervention by the Holy See would help, quote, in the case of the anti-Semitic excesses in Germany. Both denied. The campaign against the Jews came from the Nazi government, they said, and support for the Jews would only, quote, add to the war against the Jews another war against the Catholics, as Faulhaber stated. Still, Pacelli made his position known. When in March 1939 he was elected Pope and became Pius XII, the Jewish Veteran, an American publication, reflected the reaction of the Jewish community, calling his election, quote, a source of great satisfaction to Jews. Why? Quote, Pope Pius XII is known as a staunch friend of Jews, and on several occasions expressed his strong opposition to the persecution of Jews in Germany and Italy. He even served distinguished Jewish visitors to the Holy See kosher food and was known as a vigorous champion of the Vatican's anti-Nazi policy, so much so that the anti-Semitic fascists in Italy tried hard to prevent Cardinal Pacelli's election, unquote. Indeed, as Pope, Pacelli never denied his sympathy for the Jews. On November 28, 1941, young Heinz Wissler smuggled himself into an audience of German soldiers to appeal to the Pope to help his 500 fellow Jewish refugees shipwrecked in the Aegean Sea and waiting for rescue in an Italian refugee camp on the island of Rhodes. The Pope greeted him with open arms and told him repeatedly, "You are a young Jew. I know what it means, and I hope you will always be proud to be a Jew. And, quote, my Jewish friend, go with the protection of the Lord, but never forget, you must always be proud to be a Jew." Of course, he also helped. Within weeks, the 500 refugees were brought to the Ferramonti camp in southern Italy, where, under the control of the nuncio and a resident Capuchin father, they received regular supply of goods and gifts from the Pope and survived the war in good health and humane conditions. But what did Pacelli, Pius XII, think about the Nazis? Did he consider them a lesser evil compared to communism? The documents indicate a different position. Arguably, no one of the Vatican knew Germany and the Nazis better than Eugenio Pacelli, who had lived in Germany for over 12 years, both in Munich and Berlin, and had witnessed the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party from the very beginning. As early as 1923, when Hitler attempted his first revolt in Munich, Pacelli sent a report to the Vatican entitled, quote, "The anti-Catholic character of a Nazi revolt." He noted, quote, "violent agitation against the Catholic clergy, slander and mockery against priests, and especially Cardinal Archbishop Michael von Faulhaber, who, quote, during his homily in the Cathedral of Munich, denounced the persecution of the Jews." Pacelli never revised his negative opinion on the Nazis, and in 1924 spoke of the, quote, fanatically anti-Catholic Nazi Party. He even called Nazism probably the most dangerous heresy of our times. A very clear, powerful statement. Since, quote, it put state and race above all, above true religion, above the truth, and about justice. I think we can all agree with this. The same Cardinal von Faulhaber, a personal friend of Pacelli, joined the clerical circle Amici di Israele, Friends of Israel, consisting of 19 cardinals, 287 archbishops and bishops, and over 3,000 Catholic priests, all pleading for reconciliation of Catholicism and Judaism. The result of the campaign was a decree on March 25, 1925, by the Holy Office, the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith of the Catholic Church, condemning without exception any hate against the God-chosen people, a hate which is commonly known as anti-Semitism. Very clear statement, once again. Supported by Pacelli, in 1930, several German bishops and archbishops called National Socialism a heresy. The Diocese of Mainz, followed by the Bavarian and Rhinish bishops, published a decree declaring it forbidden for every Catholic to become a registered member of the Nazi Party, under threat of immediate excommunication. This position was officially supported by the Holy See with a detailed report in Osservatore Romano, the official paper of the Holy See, launched by Pacelli. In 1932, according to the German Bishops' Conference, it was declared not allowed for Catholics to belong to the Hitler Party since its program contained heresies. When Pacelli became Pope in 1939, the German consul in Cologne, Alfred Clifford, the American consul in Cologne, Alfred Clifford, recalled a meeting with him in 1937 when Vatican Secretary of State, and wrote to the U.S. State Department, quote, his Pacelli's views surprised me by their extremeness. He said that he exposed unalterably every compromise with National Socialism. He regarded Hitler not only as an untrustworthy scoundrel, but as a fundamentally wicked person, not capable of moderation. He told me that he supported the German bishops in their anti-Nazi stand. The risk of losing a large part of the Catholic youth in Germany, he said, was not as great as the consequences to the Catholic Church in general in surrendering to the Nazis. So he warned the world when he spoke at Lisieux, Lourdes, Paris, and Budapest in the 1930s about the neo-paganism of the Nazis and the cross that is contrary to the cross of Christ. And he sent 55 notes of protest, up to 45 pages in length, to the Nazi regime, condemning their violation of the Concordat of 1933, which was the only legal mean to preserve and protect the rights of the Catholic Church in Hitler's Reich. It was an agreement not with the Nazis, but with the nation of Germany, with the government, with the legally elected, unfortunately legally elected, government of Germany. It was, by the way, not the first bilateral treaty offered to Germany's new and freely elected Nazi government, but followed the quadripartite agreement with France, England, and Italy of 7 June 1933 and was signed just a month before the Avara agreement with the Jewish Agency of 25 August 1933. Not surprisingly, Pacelli was instrumental in the launch of the papal encyclical Mit brennender Sorge, an uncompromising condemnation of the Nazi ideology in German language, the only encyclical ever issued in German language, for which he invited the most outspoken German anti-Nazi bishops to Rome, just to toughen their draft from with great sorrow to with burning sorrow, for example, and many other examples. He also arranged for the condemnation of the basics of the racist Nazi ideology extracted from a review of Hitler's Mein Kampf by the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, be sent to all Catholic educational institutions in 1938, the year of the introduction of racial laws in Italy after Hitler's visit to Rome. On this occasion, by the way, Pope Pius XI and Secretary of State Pacelli withdrew to Castel Gandolfo, quote, due to the foul air in Rome. They ordered all Roman prelates to stay away from receptions for the Nazi leader and closed the Vatican Museum just in case the art-loving Führer would suddenly decide to visit them. Quote, on the feast of the exaltation of the cross, a cross which is not the cross of Christ as exposed in Rome, Pius XI told newlywed couples at an audience in Castel Gandolfo on May 3, 1938. And on September 6, 1938, with an audience of pilgrims from Belgium, he stated, spiritually, we are all Semites. So the anti-Semitic laws go against all of us. So what happened after Kristallnacht, which was the overture to the Holocaust, the pogrom night of November 9, 1938? When the synagogues of Germany were burned, Pacelli realized that the time for wars was over. It was time to act. Just 3 weeks later, on November 30, 1938, he sent a circular to all nunciatures ordering the papal diplomats to ask hospitals and universities for opportunities to employ Jewish academics from Germany and Italy. Exactly 2 months later, after the Kristallnacht, on January 9, 1939, when the busy Christmas season was over, he sent another circular, this time to all Catholic archbishops of potential immigration countries, 51 at least, asking them to do everything possible to obtain visas from their governments to facilitate the immediate immigration of 200,000 German non-Aryans and to offer them in their new destination, quote, religious buildings and schools so that they can continue to follow their religious Jewish traditions. Clearly, he did not refer to converts to Catholicism, but instead to Jews, at a time when 233 racial Jews still lived in Germany, but about only 20,000 converts who were affected by the racial laws. So the number clearly indicates he wanted to evacuate nearly all German Jews. Although the Holy See was willing to finance the mass immigration and asked for donations, this impressive project failed due to the lack of cooperation from the states. Brazil promised 3,000 visas, but issued only 1,000. Argentina and Chile offered 1,000 each. Only the Dominican dictator Trujillo was more generous, issuing up to 800 visas every half a year, when the nuncio personally was required to request them in the name of Pope Pius XII. My last point is, why no more open protests? In his speech to the College of Cardinals, on June 2, 1943, Pius XII stated, quote, every word that we addressed to the responsible authorities and every one of our public declarations had to be seriously weighted and considered in the interest of the persecuted themselves, in order not to make their situation unwittingly even more difficult and unbearable. On November 7, 1944, the British ambassador, Arthur Osborne, directly suggested that the Pope not to speak out on behalf of the Hungarian Jews, since he would also have to condemn the war crimes of the Russians and feared serious political repercussions. Instead of the alleged silence, we can rather observe a reduced public outcry in form of 3 documented public protests in 1941, 1942, and 1943, for several good reasons. Pius XII knew from experience during the time of the Armenian genocide that papal protests might not save a single life, but instead might increase the speed of the deportations and massacres. When Radio Vatican reported on Nazi atrocities against the Catholic Polish population, the Polish bishops asked the Pope to stop these reports, fearing further repercussions by the Nazis. In 1942, Pius XII wrote a pastoral letter of encouragement to the Polish Catholics and sent copies for distribution to Adam Sapieha, the Archbishop of Krakow. Sapieha did not disseminate the letter, but instead burned it, telling the papal delegate that it would just serve the Nazis as a pretext for a more severe persecution of the Polish Church. When the Nazis deported the Jews of the Netherlands, Dutch Archbishop de Jong protested in a pastoral letter. As a result, the Nazis accelerated the arrest of the Dutch Jews and started to arrest all converted Jews first. They then deported them to Auschwitz. Those experiences taught Pius XII to be careful, ad maiora mala vitanda, what means to avoid a greater evil, as he wrote to Berlin Archbishop Konrad von Preysing in 1943. Indeed, the inmates of the Dachau concentration camp, about 2,800 Catholic priests among them, feared any outside protest on their behalf, especially from the Vatican, since the guards made them feel their anger, as Jean Bernard, a priest from Luxembourg, remembered in his memoirs. 1/3 of the Catholic priests of Poland were exterminated. Adolf Hitler himself stated in 1939 that any support, quote, from foreign countries is granted to those especially who want to destroy the Reich. We will consider it just a compelling cause to toughen our measures, unquote. Instead, Pius XII tried everything to shorten the war by collaboration with a conspiracy of German high-ranking officers to overthrow and kill Hitler, as we have heard, and by granting American Catholic soldiers his nihil obstat to fight side by side with the communist Russians against Hitler, whom he considered the greater evil. At the same time, he often enough delayed or even stopped deportations of Jews by more than 40 documented diplomatic interventions, both unsuccessful in Hitler's Germany and often successful in its vassal states such as Mussolini's Italy, Vichy France, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary. As you can see in my full report, which is available on my homepage, you find it in the program. Apart from this, from September 1943 until June 1944, Pius XII was a virtual hostage of Hitler. The Germans had occupied Rome, German paratroopers controlled the Vatican borders, and Hitler had given orders to SS General Karl Wolff to invade the Vatican, arrest the Pope, and bring him to Germany, or even to kill him in case that he protests against the Holocaust. So the German aggression, the German threat, was quite remarkable. Documents indicate that the plan was to stage a clash between SS men dressed as Italian partisans, occupy the Vatican, to kill priests and bishops they encountered. The German Wehrmacht would then liberate the Pope, in quotation marks, anticipating Pius XII might openly move to protest the Holocaust. Robert Kempner, United States representative at the Nuremberg trials, stated that any propaganda attempt by the Catholic Church against Hitler's Reich would not only be provoked suicide, but would have caused the killing of an even higher number of Jews and priests. Gerhard Riegner, Secretary General of the Jewish World Congress, stated that any public protest would have just increased the speed of killing. Harold Tittman, U.S. representative at the Holy See, was convinced that the Pope, quote, saved many lives by not speaking out. He went on, who can say what the Nazis would have done in their ruthless furor had they been further inflamed by public denunciations coming from the Holy See? In addition, as we have heard before, the Pope's contacts with the German military resistance required him to act prudently, since he was needed as a neutral intermediator. Any action of the Vatican would have made the German Catholics come under even more scrutiny than they already were, and would have greatly restricted their freedom of action in their work of resistance to the Nazis, which included hiding thousands of Jews or smuggling them out of Germany. So instead of a more outspoken public protest, a provocation which with the risk of an escalation, Pius XII decided to concentrate his energy on two aims: to get rid of Hitler, either by a coup d'etat or an Allied victory. As I said, he allowed US Catholic soldiers to fight with Stalin's Red Army, and to save as many Jews as possible by helping them to leave Europe in the beginning, or at least stopping or delaying their deportation into the Nazi death camps. He did not have another choice, because this was the way to avoid greater evil. Ad maiora mala vitanda. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. I'm sure I was not the only one in the room fascinated to hear you present about the release of all this information, the opening of the archives related to the Second World War. Now, to conclude or to bring these presentations together, I'm going to turn the floor once more over to Gary Krupp, also looking at some of the presentations in light of the 10 questions that you posed at the start. Gary, you have the floor.
Thank you, Monsignor Hansen. My remarks at the beginning of today's event, I set forth questions that today's event was supposed to have answered. Because we've covered a lot of ground and it's been introduced in so many documents, it's good to review what we did and how we did. My first question asked, what was the approach of the Holy See and the Catholic Church to the horror of the Holocaust? To some extent, all of our panelists addressed this question, but looking most closely at the presentation of Dr. Hesseman, Professor Yagil, and Mark Riebling, we see that the Holy See provided sanctuary to victims, military information to the Allies, and the Pope was willing to go so far as to involve in an attempted overthrow of Adolf Hitler. This is a great deal more than the Church typically is given credit for, and it's one reason why too many people question the role of the Church and the Pope at this time. My second question was about whether the future Pius XII and the Catholic Church was silent about the dangers of Nazism. Dr. Hesseman, Professor Napolitano, Professor X showed that clearly he was not. The future Pope recognized the dangers of National Socialism and warned others about them. He did this in reports to his superiors and later did so publicly in scores of diplomatic messages. He also did so through a significant hand in the strong condemnations issued by his predecessor, Pope Pius XI, and the Church was not silent. Third, I asked whether the Holy See officially recognized the Nazi regime by signing a concordat with Germany in 1933. Professor Napolitano answered this question thoroughly, and the other speakers touched on it. The agreement signed by the Holy See with Germany was not a recognition of the regime, but was an agreement with a nation, something that came after the regime had reached agreements with France, England, Italy, and the Soviet Union, and had been recognized by the League of Nations. After the fall of Nazism, it has been renewed and remains in effect to this very day. The Concordat was very important in providing a basis for protecting Jews with baptismal certificates because it defined Judaism as a faith and not a race. So while Hitler may have played up the Concordat within Germany, it was not a mark of approval from the Church. Fourth, I asked, what was the Nazi opinion of the Catholic Church and why did Hitler target it for destruction? Almost all our speakers set forth reasons why Hitler and the Nazis hated the Catholic Church, but Dr. Hesseman faced it most directly. Clearly, the Nazis despised the Church and Pius XII, and should now be clear that they had no cause to do so. Fifth, I queried whether Pope Pius XII was an anti-Semite and why he didn't protest with forceful public condemnations of the killing of the Jews. And the answer came from multiple sources. As Dr. Hesseman has illustrated, he was a friend of the Jews and a forceful defender of the Jewish community. He was deeply involved in a plot to overthrow Hitler and mandated that those around him who could shelter Jews should do so. As was discussed, however, he learned early on that the public words would not influence the Nazis in a positive manner. In fact, those closest to the matter and the Allied military asked the Pope to withhold his statements, lest they lead to greater harm. Clearly, he was not an anti-Semite, and although he prudently kept his mouth shut, but his actions spoke very loudly. My sixth question was about the accuracy of Pincus Lapidus' estimate that the Catholic Church saved between 847,000 and 882,000 Jews, and if so, whether these life-saving actions of the Catholic clergy, the religious, and individuals were connected to directors of the Vatican and Pius XII. The scholars all agree that the figure is at least what Lapida estimates, and new research indicates that the number may be considerably higher. Moreover, as both oral testimonies and written documents confirm, Vatican and papal directives were indeed behind these initiatives. Thus, Lapida's conclusion about a quarter of the Jews alive today can trace their fate back to the ancestors who were saved by the Vatican of Pope Pius XII, and that has been validated. My seventh question related to the events of October 16, 1943, where 1,259 Jews were rounded up and 1,030 were sent to Auschwitz. I wanted to hear about the actions of the Pope on that terrible day. Professor X and Dr. Hesseman showed us how the Vatican went into high gear, pursuing 3 different diplomatic avenues to try and stop the roundup. Dr. Hesseman showed us that the documents that Pius XII, his direct actions through his nephew Carlo Pacelli, succeeded in ending the arrest on 2 o'clock that afternoon. I stated that Pius XII used German military to fear of Vatican invasion to force an end of the arrest. After Pius's actions, there were no more roundups of the Jews of Rome. Unfortunately, all but 16 of the 1,030 deported Jews died in captivity. Moreover, more Roman Jews survived the war in the Vatican or other church properties. First-hand accounts show us that this was done by order of Pope Pius XII. Professor Rishlak and I were shown a document in the Rome from the letters of Montini. This is still under seal, so I was not allowed to take a picture of it or do anything with it. But it showed how on September 6, 1943, the Pope called all the cardinals together, and he said, "I'm going to be arrested and probably killed. In my desk is my letter of resignation, because when anybody enters Vatican state territory, you're immediately to leave and form a government in exile and elect a new pope." Eighth, was the Holy See complicit with aiding Nazis to escape punishment? There were some notorious churchmen who did indeed help Nazis to escape justice. The evidence also shows, however, that these were rare exceptions and that such activities did not reach the high levels of the church. In fact, after the war, the church played a key role in helping victims return home or move on to new locations. That some Nazis took advantage of those programs cannot be fairly held against the church. Its record of work with displaced persons is remarkable. Ninth, I asked how, why, and when did the esteem of the life-saving actions taken during the Holocaust by the Holy See and Pope Pius XII begin to change? Professor Rishlak told us about the massive disinformation campaign run by the Soviets in order to discredit the Pope, the Church, and religion in general. Rishlak co-authored a book with Soviet bloc agents who directed parts of that campaign. It was strategic disinformation, not honest scholarship, and it culminated in Pius XII's reputation a few years after his death. My last question concerned what we can expect from the Vatican archives that Pope Francis has ordered opened in 36 days. On March 2nd, Professor X described that all the archives from the entire pontificate of Pope Pius XII will be open to scholars, and several of our panelists noted what they're going to find, anticipating that will only strengthen their arguments. The reason this has taken so much time, is that there have been literally millions of pages that have to be summarized and cataloged, and the opening in March will shed further light on the truth of Pope Pius XII and the Church during the Holocaust. And thank you very much for your kind attention to Monsignor Hansen.